So, comment est votre anglais ici? It's okay? If I go slow, is it good? Should I go slow? Okay. So I'm going to be talking, so our project in Madagascar is just beginning. It's very new. We don't have a lot of, let's say, results to show you yet. So I'm going to talk about the project and the future of the project, but I will talk just as much about what we know from the state of California, which also has a lot of this kind of rock. And we've been studying it there for many, many decades. To give you an idea of some of the interests that we have. So let's see here. So to start with California, this is a map of California. California is about 2/3 the size of Madagascar. And it has 6,000 square kilometers of ultramafic substrates in California. And I'll explain to you what ultramafic means very soon, okay? This is only 1.5% of the state area, but it gives you an idea of the importance of the substrate when you realize that California, which is also a biodiversity hotspot, like Madagascar, that fully 15% of all the endemic species that are in the state are only found on ultramafic soils. So it's a very, very important substrate for endemic species. What we know about Madagascar is much less. I'm estimating that there's probably less than 200 square kilometers of ultramafic substrate soils and rocks in Madagascar, which is maybe 0.03% of the area of Madagascar. And right now we don't have any data yet on endemic species. So that's just what we know. And I want to note, this is a pretty cool website. It's a website, it's a worldwide website that's run by an American NGO that identifies mining and mineral sites around the whole world. And they have a special website for Madagascar. And if you do searching on the serpentine subgroup, it will show you where there are mines and where there are outcrops. Do you know this word outcrop? In French, it's fleurissement. You know of rocks? Okay? Yeah, affleurement, okay, affleurement. Okay, yeah, so that's outcrop. Okay, so serpentine is interesting botanically because it often supports many endemic species. But I'm an ecologist, and my interests are more in the functioning of ecosystems and evolution. And so I want to make clear that serpentine, which is another word for ultramafic rocks, are used as a model system for studying lots of different evolutionary questions and lots of ecological questions as well. For example, there are plants in the world, so thus far about 700 species have been identified, that accumulate toxic heavy metals like nickel, chromium, manganese, zinc, and copper from the soil at very high levels. These are very toxic chemicals. They would kill you at these levels. Yet we now know that at least 700 plant taxa hyperaccumulate some of these heavy metals. So there are lots of questions about this. How do they do it? Why do they do it? How can they survive? And does it have adaptive significance in evolution? Also, we use serpentine very often in studies of how changing soil fertility or productivity affects ecological outcomes of things like competition between plants or the effects of disturbances like maybe wildfire or grazing or things like climate change as well. Because very fertile soils support very, very different floras and very different ecologies than really bad soils, okay? We also use this to understand how invasion ecology works. Soils that are very bad usually don't have many invaders. And this question of soil productivity and biodiversity is a central question for ecology. How does the soil interact with ecological communities to drive biodiversity? Really important questions. Also, there are other questions just related to the serpentine flora. For example, there are many endemics on serpentine soils. How can we conserve them? And in a place like Madagascar, this is a big question because most of the serpentine or ultramafic outcrops are being mined. So they're disappearing very, very quickly. Ambatovi is a good example. MBG got there very early and did a big inventory of all the species But now the area they did the inventory on, it's gone. It's now a huge hole in the ground. And so it's important, I think, that we identify if there are endemic species before they disappear. And please, if you don't understand what I'm saying, tell me. Okay? And there are lots of other questions as well. Okay, so now I'll tell you what these things are. Okay, so ultramafic rocks. So what these are, have you all had like some class in geology maybe, or physical science? Okay, so do you remember what a rocher igné is? This was a magma. It's molten rock underground, and if it comes out, it makes lava. Okay, so this is what comes out of volcanoes. This is rock that is changed by heat or by hot water usually. So we call this a metamorphic rock. And then also there are sediment rocks, which are made by rivers or by the ocean, okay? So ultramafic rocks are igneous or metamorphic, and the original rock is called peridotite, okay? This is named because peridote is a precious stone that comes from olivine. So the definition of an ultramafic rock is a rock with less than 45% silica. Silica in its pure form is called quartz. Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
Chalcedone is another example of pure, and the beach is pure silica usually as well, okay? Or it has more than 90% mafic minerals, which are iron and magnesium silicates. So this is the source rock, it's called peridotite. And if you add water and heat and give it 10,000 years, 100,000 years, or 1,000,000 years, it becomes this. And this is called serpentinite or serpentinite. And the name comes because the scientist who named it thought the color was like a snake. So snake rock, okay? So these are the two main rocks, serpentinite and peridotite. Okay, so here is something about the chemical composition. So I'm sure you've heard of granite or granite. I'm sure you've heard of diorite or gabbro. So they are very, very different chemically. Okay? If you think about granite, it's very light colored. It's pink or it's white or it's very clear. And it's composed of aluminosilicates and rocks like feldspars and quartz. It's actually it's not so heavy. It's a light rock. Okay? And as we go down this line, we get to dark rocks and then very dark rocks that are made from magnesium and iron silicates. So this name, mafic, comes from magnésie and fer. That's where the name is from, okay? So magnesium and ferric silicates. Ultramafic is even more. So now if you look at the rock composition, you'll see that granite has very high silica, ultramafic rocks have low silica. Granite has high aluminum, ultramafic rocks have low aluminum. Ultramafic rocks have high iron, they have high magnesium, but all of the macronutrients that plants need, they have very little in the soil. Low calcium, low potassium, low sodium, and also low phosphorus. So one of the main issues is that these rocks do not have the basic nutrients that plants need. So where do these rocks come from? They are very rare on the surface of the earth. It's very uncommon to find them, okay? The reason for this is because they come from inside of the earth. They're usually not found on the surface. So if you've had a class in like earth science or geology, you remember that the earth is made of a bunch of like layers, like couche, right? And inside of it is something called the mantle, or the manteau, you would say in French. And the manteau is made of ultramafic rocks. Peridotite is what makes the mantle. So this stuff, at the top, it's a rock, lithosphere from rock, but in the bottom, it's molten, it's a liquid. And it's moving because it's so hot, right? And this is what's moving the plates on the surface. Les plaques, tectoniques, how they move around, they're moving on this molten rock that's moving all the time. So what happens is this mantle, which is usually it's in the oceans, it's maybe 10, 15 kilometers below the surface. And in the continents, it's 30 to 40 kilometers below the surface. It comes to the surface when plates hit one another. And when you take an ocean plate and you hit it with a continent, the continent will always go above it because the continent is made mostly of granite, and granite is very light and the peridotite is very heavy. So it falls underneath, and as it goes, it melts and it makes all of the volcanoes that we see, okay? And the material that is on the top of the crust gets stuck onto the continent. And this is how the mantle finds its way to the surface. So I'm going to try to explain in English a scenario so you understand how this works. So this is going to sound really stupid. So if you take a pizza, okay, pizza, and you heat it in the oven, you make it very warm, okay? So the cheese is running and dripping off of it, and it's covered with things like tomatoes and vegetables and chicken and salami and all this other stuff, okay? So now make this pizza very hot, and then go to your kitchen in the door and close the door, and then push the pizza under the door. When you push the pizza, the bottom of the pizza, which we call the crust, yeah, this will go underneath. And that will go down to the bottom, and if it goes down 70 or 80 kilometers, it will melt and make volcanoes. But all of the stuff on the top, right, the cheese and the tomatoes, what happens to this? It gets stuck on the door. No? And if you do this for 10 million years, you will have many kilometers of all of this pizza stuff stuck on the door. This is how this process works. Like California, most of the state of California is all of that pizza stuff. I'm not kidding. It's like 100 million years of this plate getting pushed under the other one, and it just keeps scraping off all of this crap on the top of the pizza, and it just keeps adding to the continent. Madagascar also has a lot of this, but in Madagascar, it's very ancient. I mean, it's billions of years old, some of this stuff, okay? California is much newer. So this process brings the mantle rocks to the surface, okay? So you can see them. So in California, what you see is that, I will use this, it's the one on the top probably, yeah? This guy here. Okay, do you see how it's in lines? It goes in these lines, always in the state. And these mark the ancient places of subduction, where an oceanic plate was coming under the continental plate. And you can see where it was happening 200 million years ago was here, where it was happening 90 million years ago was here, and more recently was here in these big lines. Okay, so, however, there's one other way that you can, that we can make this kind of rock, okay? So, and this other way is very important for Madagascar, because the normal process isn't happening in Madagascar right now. So what can happen is when you have, actually we have a pen, I can show it on here. Whoop, I'm gonna drop the flag. So if I draw on here, like I make, so if this is the surface, and this is one of these bubbles of magma, okay, underground. And then here's one that's coming to the surface, and this is making volcanoes, right? Okay, but this one doesn't get to the surface, okay? So this rock will never erupt on the surface. So what happens to this rock over a very, very long time is it gets cooler and cooler, and it becomes a rock. Right now it's lava, okay? So if this rock, if it never gets mixed, and if it takes a long time to cool, what happens to this rock is, as it cools, the heavy minerals fall to the bottom. And the heavy minerals are these guys. So like chromite, for example, like chromite, it's very, very heavy. And it has a very low freezing temperature. And so it has a very high crystallization temperature, so it will fall to the bottom. Then olivine will be next, then feldspars, and then quartz. And so you'll have this mixture of chrome at the bottom, and then peridotite, and then pyroxenite, and then feldspars, and then quartz at the top, okay? So at the very, very bottom is where you'll find this peridotite. So there are two ways to make it. One is to have plate tectonics bring it to the surface through plates crashing, And the other one is just simply to have granites underground that are never erupting and they're cooling, and the peridotite is found at the bottom. Okay? This is really important. Most of the places in Madagascar that have this kind of rock are being formed by this process. Okay, I think that's about it for the geology. Okay, so let's talk about the vegetation that grows on this stuff. Did I have a soil? I went through this. So I want to tell you a little bit about the soils, okay? Because the soils are the interface between the vegetation and the rock, yeah? So what you can see is that from a lot of our studies in California, in parts per million, you can see that your serpentine soils only have half as much phosphorus, they have half as much calcium, they have 3 or 4 times more magnesium, and because they're lacking all of the important macronutrients, you can't grow so much plants. You can't grow so much what we say in English biomass, okay? As a result, there's less organic matter in the soil, and there's much less nitrogen as well. So the point is that starting with this rock, which has very low nutrient content and also toxic heavy metals, which I'll talk about in a minute, the soil that develops on it is very nutrient poor, and it's difficult for many plants to grow on this soil, okay?
Does it tend to be more acidic as well?
No, less acidic. It's quite alkaline. Yeah, it's a very alkaline rock, actually. And I want to note, and I'll bring this up later, that the other really interesting thing about these ultramafic soils, I told you they're very rare. Because they're so toxic and they're very rare, there has been very little opportunity for plants to adapt to it, right? One of the reasons for the very, very strange floras. But when you think about, when we talk in English about heavy metals, if you're drinking water from the city, you don't want to have chromium or nickel or cobalt in your water because it's going to kill you, okay? So this is where all of this comes from. It all comes from ultramafic rocks. Another thing that comes from ultramafic rocks is asbestos. You know, these little fibers that they use for insulation, that if you breathe them, they will give you cancer. This also comes from the same rock. It's a crazy rock. It's rare and it's really toxic on a lot of levels. Okay, so, I guess I'm going a little faster than I want. Okay, so what about serpentine vegetation? So there was a Swiss soil scientist, very famous, Hans Jenny, who wrote in 1980 about what he called the serpentine syndrome. So in this syndrome, very low soil fertility, and in some cases heavy metal toxicity, lead to, it's moving quickly, sorry. 1, very low productivity and low rates of growth. So again, this is from our California studies, okay? But you can see that you see that biomass is less than half in the serpentine versus the normal soils. Vegetation cover is lower, litter cover is lower, and there's more bare soil. Chaparral is a kind of shrubland, okay, in California. Same thing, very low growth, only grows half as fast as on the regular soils. Cover is lower, litter cover is lower, and there's much more rock cover, typically, okay, on the site. Okay, also as a result, you get very open vegetation structure. This is an area of ultramafic rock in California where I've done a lot of work. You can see the soil is very red because it has so much iron in it, okay? Also, 75 years ago, there was a fire here, and you can see that in 75 years, it's only covering half of the ground. This site, very nearby, is on a very fertile soil, and in only 30 years, the shrubs are 2 meters high, and you can't even get through them anymore. It's too tight. So very, very different. And because I'm an ecologist, I'm interested in the ecosystem impacts of this, and a big ecosystem impact of this difference is differences in how wildfire works in these systems, okay? So this is, from our studies, we showed that on average, this site only burns about every 75 years, whereas this site burns every 20 years. Why? Because this grows fuels very quickly, and this grows fuels very slowly, and there are gaps between the shrubs. So if one shrub catches fire, if there's no wind, the fire is going to go out, okay? And then you can see that fire severity is also much higher on this type than it is on this, etc. So anyway, these things affect the vegetation, but they also affect ecosystem processes a lot. And I wanted to note that we saw similar things in Madagascar. And this is Brigitte and the group. We were working in Batovi. And here is the boundary of where you leave the ultramafic rocks, and you can see it becomes forest immediately. And as soon as you walk onto the ultramafic rocks, it becomes a shrubland with lots of open ground. And this is at Valzoro, this is peridotite. And so this is the vegetation growing on the peridotite. It's all perennial grasses, okay? As soon as you leave the peridotite and you walked onto other rock types, then there was eucalyptus and other things growing, but I didn't see it growing on the peridotite. So you very often see a big change in the vegetation when you go from one to the next. You also have a high ratio of native to exotic species. Exotic species are invaders, right, that were introduced. So for example, in Chaparral, you see there's a higher proportion of native species on serpentine. In grassland, it's a huge difference, like twice as many native species on the serpentine in the grassland than there is on the non. Why? Because the natives have had time to adapt to the soil, and most of the invaders were recently introduced, and most of them do not come from places with serpentinite. Okay, so also I wanted to note what we saw in Madagascar. I saw no invaders at Ambatobi. There probably were some, but I didn't see any. But as soon as we left it, we saw eucalyptus, we saw pines, we saw rubus, and we saw other things, okay? Lantana, we saw in lots of places as well. If you go to Valazoro, I noticed it was mostly grass on the peridotite, and we started to see pines where there wasn't that. Okay, and also, and this is what probably interests most of you, there are very high rates of endemism in most of the world on this soil type. I won't explain those graphics. So about 20 years ago, 2006, we published a study from California where we studied the serpentine flora from across the state. It took us 3 years to do this study, and we had many crews working. I'm only going to talk, it's very complex, this diagram. I'm only going to talk about this part, okay? I'm interested in endemic richness, which is the total number of endemic species in a region of California, okay? And so what I want you to know is, like, what are the groups that are important? First one is geological age of exposure. This is not the age of the rock. The rock may have crystallized 400 million years ago or 1 billion years ago. This is the age that the rock erosion opened it to the air so plants could come and grow on it, okay? So, and then the other one is geographic province, which is just another word for all the things we don't understand, okay? So then, if you look, here's another important driver, is regional productivity, which is the ability of the system to grow biomass and sequester carbon, and it's mostly driven by precipitation, okay? So old soils, high precipitation, and the area of serpentine in the region. Makes sense. These are classic old drivers of biodiversity: age, area, productivity, okay? So if you come to Madagascar, obviously a lot of the country has quite a bit of rainfall. And some of the areas have been available for a long time. However, they're quite small, as far as we can tell. The biggest outcrop, I think, in the entire country is Ambatobi, or it used to be the biggest outcrop. Now it's the biggest hole. And I think it's maybe 25 to 30 square kilometers total of the area that they're going to be mining. If you go to Valzoro, which we went to a week and a half ago, it's only 1 square kilometer. It's very small, right? This is 1 football field by 1 football field, right? Basically, okay? And then in around Andriamen, this area, it's very small patches as well, but there are many of them, maybe 10 to 15 square kilometers. So I'm guessing, but after looking at the geological maps yesterday with Cito at the Bureau de Cadastre Minier de Madagascar, I'm estimating maybe 200 square kilometers. I mean, there could be more, but based on the maps, that's what I think. So anyway, something to know. So if you compare this, I'm sorry, California is not a nation, although it acts like a nation very often. This is the estimated serpentine area, the percent of the state, and the percent of endemic species in California that are only found on this soil, and only 2 nickel hyperaccumulator species. Only 2. New Caledonia, which is another French colony in the Pacific, look at this. 1/3 of the entire area of New Caledonia is serpentine. It's a huge area. It's really, and it's also being mined. Huge mines everywhere in New Caledonia. 39% of the flora is endemic to serpentines. It's crazy. And there are 185 hyperaccumulator species at least. okay? If you go to Brazil, they found about 50 of them. It also has a lot of serpentine area, but it's a huge country, and it's a very small part of the country. We don't know how many endemics there are. Cuba has been very well studied. 7% of the island is serpentine. 15% of the endemic flora is from serpentine, and about 128 species have been identified as hyperaccumulators. And you can see that Madagascar has a very small area. By my estimate, I could be wrong, but that's my estimate. And we know nothing about the endemics yet. My guess is we will find hyperaccumulators, but thus far we have not found any. Okay, so now I want to explain this because I've been talking about this for a lot. First, I'm going to have a drink.
So why are there so few hyperaccumulators in California, even though there's such a area?
That's a great question, and I think I'm going to explain it here. Okay? So, first of all, as I noted, I think 720 plant taxa so far have been demonstrated to hyperaccumulate heavy metals. Mostly nickel. I'd say 80% of them hyperaccumulate nickel. But also copper, cobalt, manganese, zinc, and one that does chromium. But chromium is so toxic that I think it's kind of beyond the pale. So what is the definition of hyperaccumulation? This is the definition for most minerals, greater than 1,000 micrograms per gram of plant biomass. Okay? This would kill you and me in a second. We'd be dead immediately. So it's amazing that there are plants that can sequester this much of this poison inside of them and survive. Some of these, like zinc and manganese, I think the limit is 10,000. Okay, so here's partly an answer to your question. Almost all of the hyperaccumulators are found in areas of very old soils. Like, for example, in Cuba, they have old serpentine soils and young ones. And the old soils have lots of hyperaccumulators, and the young ones have almost none. But the heavy metals have to be available to biological organisms. So, California has chromite and it has nickel, but it's not very bioavailable. I don't know the last time you had chemistry, but you know what oxidation is? Okay, so oxidation is what your stomach does to food. Okay? Uses free radicals, it breaks the food down and it releases the energy. When you do that, you create byproducts, okay? And so what happens when you oxidize tropical soils and you have them under rainfall all the time is it releases the metals, it puts them in a valence state that can be taken up by biological organisms and incorporated into their bodies. Chrome in California is usually not bioavailable. In other words, it exists, but it will just go right through my body because has a different charge, a different ionic charge than it has in Madagascar. So you need to have warmth, you need to have a lot of rainfall, and you need to have a long, long period of time. And this is what makes the nickel deposits, for example, that they are mining at Mbatuvi. It makes a thick crust of what we call a ferrolytic, or you've heard of laterite, you've heard of laterite. It makes a thick crust of laterite. That is the old rock that has been decomposed by millions of years of rain and water and rain and heat and rain. And it takes the nickel and it pushes it down into the soil. And it gets magnified there. So the answer is that in most of the temperate parts of the world, there is chromium and there is nickel, but it's not bioavailable. So the plants don't need to hyperaccumulate it. Now, there are many theories about what is happening. The best evidence from the science is that the adaptive significance is that having all of this metal in your tissue means that insects don't eat you. So it is a plant defense mechanism in most cases, it appears. So by having leaves that are full of nickel, you kill the insects that try to eat you. And it's been shown in some very excellent science, really strong differences between hyperaccumulators and very similar plants from the same genus nearby. So here's the important families. In the temperate latitudes, it's Brassicaceae, and in places in the tropics, it's usually the euphorbes, Phyllanthacea, and Rubiaceae, and of course, these are very closely related. And the genus probably Psychotria has many, many, many species that are hyperaccumulators, and of course, I'm sure you have this in Madagascar as well. The other interesting thing that brings about a lot of the science is that there is the possibility to do phytoremediation with these species. In other words, because they pull the nickel from the soil, if you put these plants on a mine site, you can use them to clean the soil, because then you can harvest the plants and then you can deal with the nickel off-site. There is a lot of science being done on this. And most of the science about the hyperaccumulation is being done by people seeking to develop phytoremediation. Okay? Okay, so how do you test for this? Okay, the way I'm doing it is very primitive. It's the easiest way. You use a chemical called dimethylglyoxime, or DMG. It's a nickel chelator, so it links to nickel and pulls it out of whatever it's in. We soak it into paper, and if you break a leaf or a stem, you take the resin, or the sève, you would say in French, and you just put the paper, and it will turn pink this fast if it has nickel. So you see an example of a test of a Psychotria in New Caledonia, very strong nickel content. So this poor guy, this one of the village children who really got excited about trying to see the change, we never saw it, so he was very disappointed. This guy did every single one of the plants that we did. I tried to give it to other kids and they got into a big fight, so I was giving it to him to do it. Maybe he'll be working at MBG someday. He's very excited about plants and hyperaccumulation. Now, the best way to do it is using X-ray fluorescence, which is this strange machine here, but it costs about $20,000 US to buy this thing. So I didn't bring one because I don't have the money for this. But there are people who have it. Like the person who wrote the project, Nishi Rajakaruna, he has one of these. The cool thing about this one is you don't need sève, you don't need the resin, and you can use it on herbarium samples. You can have a dry plant from 100 years ago and it will still tell you if it has nickel inside. So it's the best way to go. So far we haven't identified any in Madagascar. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about, just relatively quickly, some of the things we've done in California that I think you could also do in Madagascar, but probably in the future as you collect data. So my lab at UC Davis hosts the California Serpentine Endemism Database. And so the latest publication is here. You can get this easily, and we can provide the database to anyone who wants to see it. It includes level of endemism, rarity, the distribution of the taxa, their taxonomy, life form, biogeography, etc. So this was the first paper we first published this in 2005, and then in 2011 we updated it because there were a lot of taxonomic changes, and then just 5 years ago we published the new database that has all of the new, those of you who work in botany know botany is going crazy right now. They're changing families, they're changing genera. I mean, everything is changing constantly. So it's very difficult to keep up with this. So we're trying. So our definitions, I won't explain too many, but we have 2 definitions of endemic. And we use herbarium records, literature publications, and our own experience in the field as well. We also started with Art Kruckeberg's work, published in 1984. You have one of his books, which everyone should read. It's a book about the effects of geology on ecosystems and plant life. Art died about 10 years ago, which was too bad, but he did the first list of this. And so we started with his list, and then we went to the herbarium records. And the beautiful thing about modern herbarium records is you can access them all virtually. It's completely changed science. When I started to do this work, I had to drive to every herbarium and spend days going through the collections, and now I can go on my computer and I can access them, and I can read the records, I can read where they were. I will say this, and most botanists are not geologists, but also most geologists are not botanists. As a result, the old accession records are really hard to use. Like, you have a project in MBG trying to find lost species, right? The record says, somewhere close to Fianaransua. Oh, great, I can find this one easy. So this is the problem, is you don't have locations and the botanists don't know anything about the rocks. So it's very difficult. You know, you read it and they say, and sometimes they say the rocks, but they're wrong. We found this on granite. No, you didn't. I went there and it's peridotite. And it's a big difference. So anyway, you know, this is this typical stuff. But so basically, if the plant is more than 95% on serpentine, we call it a strict endemic. If it's more than 85%, we call it a broad endemic. And then we have these other names for them. Okay, so the data we have, species names, taxa names, families, Is it an endemic? Is it not? Number of sources we have for the evidence, the standard deviation, the standard error. Is it a rare species? Is it listed as endangered or threatened by the federal government or by the state government? Where is it found? Which part of California? Is it a monocot? Is it a dicot? Is it a fern, fougere? Is it a conifer? What's its life form? Is it a forb? Is it a grass? Is it perennial? Is it a shrub? This kind of thing. Okay, so all of this information is in this database. And we also have information about the genera, the center of the genera distribution, where they come from, how many species. We have the common name. We have the elevations and all this kind of stuff as well. So just to summarize, we have 255 endemic taxa to serpentine in California. Actually, it's about 260 now because we're adding new ones all the time. And here's the list I was showing the percent of endemism: New Caledonia, California, Cuba, Balkans and Greece, Italy and Spain, and we can do this for other countries as well. This is by family, and we're showing that, the beauty of having science to base things on is you can build things over time, right? If we didn't have a process to collect information and to understand it, we would be totally lost. So we have Art Kruckeberg's original records, and you can see that just simply through new collections over 30 years and through some new species, we're increasing the number of taxa, but we're also changing the families. Think about Liliaceae and what happened to the family Liliaceae. Now it's like 15 families. So the main thing happened here is that it went into other families. So anyway, there's a difference between there. Now this is, I think, an interesting thing to think about. This is taking the endemic species by families, ranking them, and then comparing them for the serpentine flora versus the entire California flora. And this then starts to give you hypotheses about what is happening. Okay, so for Asteraceae, which are the most common family in California, it's the most common on serpentine in California, and it's about the same. Okay, but if you go to Brassicacea, you'll see that there's a much higher proportion of endemics on the serpentine flora than there is in California. So there's something going on with the family Brassicacea that allows it to adapt to serpentine. You also see this from Polygonacea, from Liliacea, from Orobancacea, from Linacea, and also from Apiacea a little bit, and then all of these families as well. So this provides interesting hypotheses for scientists to work on. Why are certain families doing so well on these really bad soils and other ones don't? Some are underrepresented, like Polymoniacea. It's less on serpentine. Also, Fabacea is much less on serpentine, the legumes, and also Boraginacea as well. Anyway, just some patterns. And we can say the same thing by genera. You can see some genera are very diverse on serpentine. These three, Hesperolinum, which is Linacea, Eriogonum, which is Polygonacea, and Streptanthus, which is Brassicacea, they are speciating right now. They are actively speciating. We're finding new species all the time in these families because they're on these little patches and they're not sharing pollen. You know what I mean? So you're seeing speciation. Okay, so what else can we say? Most of them are perennial forbs and annual forbs. Most of them are dicots. Most of them, the elevation follows the elevation for the whole state. Why are there so few endemics here? Because there's not much serpentine at greater than 2,000 meters. Also, almost all of it is there. And then we can also do it by region, which you could do in Madagascar as well, right? You could do this by region. Okay, so we can do biogeographic origins, where did the genera come from, and then we can also look at rarity. And I'll note that of all of the plant taxa in California that are listed by the state as either threatened or endangered, or they should be threatened or endangered, 11% are on serpentine soils, which is amazing. Okay, so now I'll just show you some pictures and then I'll summarize and we'll be finished. So some of my favorite spots. This is the University of California's McLaughlin Reserve, just west of Davis. It's north of San Francisco, maybe 2 hours. And look at all of these endemic taxa. And the cool thing here is they're all woody. These ones are all shrubs and all trees, which is kind of rare. This is near San Francisco at Ring Mountain. This is in northwestern California, very close to the redwoods. rains a lot here. It is actually a rainforest, but it is a temperate rainforest, not a tropical rainforest. This is where we have most of our restricted endemics, is ancient soils. Like this place right here is sitting on a single patch of 640 square kilometers of peridotite. 3 times more than the entire nation of Madagascar in one place, and it gets a lot of rain and it's relatively warm. This is a really bad place for soil, lots of endemics. This is a swamp in northwestern California that has some endemic species, and these are high elevation systems, 1,700 meters, 3,535 meters. This is the highest serpentine outcrop in California, I think, right here. Most of the year it's covered by 2 meters of snow. It's only open for maybe 2 months out of the year. And then some of my favorite plant species. These are endemics. These are Calochordus, which is Liliaceae. This is a Fritillaria, which is also Liliaceae. And this is Asclepias, which is Asclepiadaceae, obviously. Okay, so about our Madagascar work. So where did we go and where do we go next? So these are the places that we were able to visit. We're going here tomorrow. We went here 3 weeks ago. We went here a week and a half ago. I really wanted to go here, but it's a mining property. The mines are mostly closed right now, and we could not get permission from CRAOMA, the state agency, to go to these sites. Maybe next time, because I think there's a lot of possibility, because there's many patches of serpentine in this area. The other area with lots of patches is in Toliara, down here. There are many of them. Most of them quite small, but there are a lot of them. So this was from Batovi. Here's, whoa, it's looking very red in this picture. Anyway, so here's Brigitte, and we had a crew come to meet us from the mine, from the environmental scientists, and it was great. Brigitte told them to do the work, and they did all of the work. I'm kidding, Brigitte did most of the work. But they're collecting plants and they're helping. And so this is the rock, this is peridotite, and you can see this green material, that's nickel. This stuff, that's nickel ore. It's very beautiful. If you put water on it, it shines. In fact, I'll send these around. Hold on, I should have sent these around before. So I'll send you, these are all ultramafic rocks. This is called dunite, this is olivine, this is from Obatovi, okay? This is peridotite, this one is from Valzoro. And these green rocks are actually, this is called garnierite. It's the most important nickel ore. And these are tourmalines. You know what tourmalines are? They're pierre précieux. I mean, they can be this long and like this. I mean, people look for these to find them. And from this site, I think the Chinese got most of them already. So I was only to get the broken specimens, but it's a very pretty rock. So anyway, and then this is, on our second day, we got totally lost. We did not know where we were. And so people weren't so happy in this picture. But I was happy. I was having a good time. I was in Madagascar. This is in Valzoro. This was really cool because the village was very interested in our work and they wanted to come help us. So these kids came and helped us. And this guy, Roger knows his name. We have to ask him because you need to give this guy a scholarship to come to MDG. He knew every name of every plant. He gave us the common name for every plant that we saw. It was amazing. And he wanted to do this work. He's one of the sons of the chief from the village. And then here's the rock we found there. And then we're going here, this week at some point, which is just very close to Antananarivo. So the questions are, where do we go next? Well, there's a lot of complications. First of all, there's no good map of ultramafic outcrops right now in Madagascar. There are maps, but someone has to sit down and spend a lot of time and join it into a map. Someone can do this. Maybe a geology student can do this for a project or something, So you have to go to the Bureau de Cadastre Minier de Madagascar, and you have to spend a lot of time. Many of the outcrops are a long way from Tana, so it's a challenge to get to them. Many of them are small and scattered, and you have to get permission. So, it's not easy to do this kind of work. It will take a long time. So we started this work, and that's Tito looking at maps. And these are some of the maps that we looked at. This was really frustrating because when we went to the map library, they did not have the maps alphabetized. And there were 500, maybe? How many maps? You and I spent more than 1 hour. So it's like the first one was A, and I thought, oh, this is great. Then the next one starts with a Z, and the next one starts with an M, and then a C. We had to look through every single map from the whole country, and we just pulled a few. I felt bad because we were there with a geology class of students, and they were supposed to find a special map, and they couldn't find the map. And they used the entire class just looking for the map. They did no work at all. It was really sad. Anyway, so where to go next? So here's an example. So this is Toliara. This is a map that we found. This is an area called Voibori. There's another place called Ancazamanga and then Fotadrebo. So tell me, where can you see the serpentine in this map? You can't. You know why? Because it's this little teeny hole. These guys. Every one of those little things is serpentine. So you have to drive 6 hours from Toliara, and then somehow you have to find these little teeny places out in the middle of nowhere. So this is why I'm good at this work, because I'm a geologist by training originally, and I know the rocks when I see them. So you have to get trained to understand what the rocks look like. It's not so hard. I mean, you could learn how to do it, somebody. But anyway, that's important to know that. So, project summary. First of all, this was an exploratory, preliminary study. Okay, we're just doing some exploration. We sampled 3 serpentine sites within 6 hours of Tana, and we did find others that I think we should visit if we can sometime. We collected as many woody species as we could, and we conducted assays for nickel hyperaccumulation. The plants are still being identified, and thus far we haven't found no plants that were hyperaccumulating. We started the cartographic work with the maps to try to ID the full extent of serpentine. And this is going to be a difficult study. Small areas, small outcrop sizes, they're scattered all across the country, a difficult study. But we'll see. It might be possible to find a little bit of funding to continue this work in the future. And I want to finish. I want to acknowledge the Missouri Botanical Garden, their branch in Tananarivo, and particularly Brigitte, Jean-Baptiste, Roger, and Hasina, who worked very closely with me in designing the day-to-day project, and also Marina and Sylvie, who worked in actually developing the proposal and getting the funding from Fulbright in the beginning, and Sito for helping me with a bunch of things. For example, he saved me from my trip to Andringitra. I'm not going to tell this story, but anyway. I want to thank also the U.S. Fulbright Specialist Program. This was really a wonderful program. I have had a Fulbright award in the past, but this was a whole new program for me, and I thought it was really cool. And also thanks to the embassy as well for facilitating my visit and for showing up. Really appreciate that. Anyway, thank you.